Hello everyone, and welcome to my TED Talk. Today we'll be addressing this question. What tools or strategies could be effective to increase youth voting rates and other forms of political participation? And for political participation, I'll be referring exclusively to candidacy and young people running for office. But let's take it back for a second to an introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Maddie Tharp, and I'm 18 years old, and I'm too young and poor to represent my country through politics. And many of you in this room probably fall under one of those categories as well. And therefore, we can't actually represent, or we're not encouraged to represent our country through office. And similarly, young people have never really been encouraged to vote either. In the 20th century, as you can see, the voting rates aren't very high, and they spike slightly more in the 21st century, but I would like to note that these are the exception to the rule and not the rule themselves, as there are certain elections that are really high, but they dip back down. This could be due to something called salience, which is how important an election feels to a demographic. But either way, even when these elections are high, they are still much lower than the voting rates of other demographics, which is why this is something that needs to be addressed. Now, the age of the candidates have really come to the forefront of people's minds because of these two politicians, the former president and the current president. As you can see, they are at least 3 decades older than the average US citizen. This is the average US citizen's age. And this is why a lot of people in the US feel that they are not being represented in the candidate choices that they have. And a little less visibly, many of the people who actively participate in policy at all levels, whether that's just voting or attending meetings, are much older as well. This is actually a picture from a Democratic caucus here in Durango that I and Shay went to a couple weeks ago. And the average age here had to be 60, 65, and Shay and I were right there, a handful of young people, probably under the age of 50. There weren't many of us. And this is an issue because a lot of young people want to be involved in policy. 1 in 5 young people want to run for office, and a lot of young people want to vote and should be voting. So why aren't they? There's a lot of reasons that this could be. Part of it could be because of a feeling of qualification that you need to run for office. If you don't feel qualified, you're not going to run. And the first step to feeling qualified is having adequate finances. And running for office can be really expensive. Now, recently I believe that the Democratic Party spent about $30 million on an ad campaign nationally. Now this makes sense because that's a lot of places that you need to get your ad out to. But how much could it cost for a local school board district, maybe in LA, for 2 people to run? Think about that for a minute. And now I'll show you this slide. In 2020, a single LA school district's top 2 candidates together spent more than $500,000. Now, how many in this room could shell out $500,000 to run for a paid or underpaid position? Yeah, that's what I was expecting. And these people probably already had a sizable amount of this money stored away in a bank account, and they probably have flexible jobs that they've been at for a long time that they were able to take time off of to gain donations from a lot of people to raise this amount of money. This is not reasonable for a college student, someone with a part-time job, maybe someone just out of high school, to actually do. And this is why a lot of young people are extremely concerned about losing their income while they are running for office or even while they are in office. And this is why a lot of young people don't feel qualified to actually run for office. Luckily though, there are a lot of organizations that are here to tackle that issue, either by directly funding young people through grants or by giving them the tools and skills and volunteer work to phone bank and other things so that they can raise the money for candidacy. There are also a lot of organizations here that aim to get young people to vote, though they focus on other issues than financial. And it's a really good thing that these organizations exist, because local parties and the parties in general are not doing their job. There's evidence to suggest that young people really aren't even on the radar of local parties. Now, you can see here that 25% of young people are contacted by local parties, whereas 60% of older adults are contacted. And this really makes the picture that I showed you before make sense, why there's so many older people there. And this is really concerning because these local parties are key to getting young people actually involved in policy. As you can see, people who are contacted by local parties are 7% more likely to vote, which really adds up in the long run. Now let's go to another reason other than finance and voter contact of why somebody could feel qualified to run for office. And this is encouragement. Now, young people really respond to encouragement more than older adults. When a young person is encouraged, they can take that encouragement and actually run for office or vote. Older adults don't need the encouragement to do these things. However, young people are not being encouraged at the same rate as older adults because probably things like their finances are not in the right shape and they just don't have the same established social group that can support them in such ways. And the next thing that makes somebody feel qualified to run for office is encouragement. Just like any job, you want to have a background in the job, whether that's a college degree or an internship. You want similar things for when you run for office. This could start off as simply attending a political demonstration, which is really low effort. And then you can go to voting, and voting once can lead to voting habitually, which is really important. And voting habitually can get you in with a local party or a local candidate where you can volunteer and work on their team, which can then give you the tools and knowledge to be able to run for office yourself. And the next thing that can go into making somebody feel qualified, but is kind of a separate thing on its own, is the internet. Now this is probably responsible for a lot of the higher voting rates in the 21st century. This was really first demonstrated in 2008 when Obama really trusted that the internet could get him the votes that he needed to win his 2008 presidential election. And this really showed as he, over the course of his election, sent out over 9 trillion individual emails. And this really helped because by the end, he had over 5 million people clicking the I voted button on Facebook. And again, most of these people were young people because young people are more likely and more tech savvy so they can use the internet. The internet is also really important other than just getting votes for a particular candidate. It's really important because it can apply a more social aspect to policy that you can't get in just the party system. By being on the internet, young people can feel that politics are more a part of their daily lives, which makes it feel more important to them, which is what I call manufactured salience. And being online can also get young people into different political groups and online areas where they can meet a lot of people and be introduced to new ideas and public affairs that they may not have heard about before, which can increase their interest in public affairs, which really increases their chance of voting, which is very, very important in the long run. But let's change gears a little bit. Now instead of looking at why young people are not being able to get into office through different factors, let's get inside the heads of the local parties that are not making this any easier for them. So firstly, you may have heard that young people go through a liberal phase and become more conservative as they get older. This is true. This is 100% true and proven. And as I talked about before, young people are less likely to vote. And this chance of voting increases slightly every single year. And this is why the Republican Party particularly does not target young people when it comes to voting and running for office as well. And the Democratic Party also does this, but a little less so. The Republican Party doesn't target young people because to target a young person, you have to sway their political ideology to get them to vote more conservatively, while also convincing them to just vote at all. Whereas the Democratic Party, it's easier to target older liberal adults because they are more likely to vote, but younger people aren't as hard for them because you don't have to sway their ideology while also convincing them to vote. But interestingly, this is totally turned on its head when it comes to candidacy. Young people are way more likely to be supported to run for office by the Republican Party than the Democratic Party. And this seems counterintuitive because of the stat I just showed you all. So why could this be? And this is what I wondered as well. But after doing a lot more research, I came up with a working theory of why this could be. I believe that because the Republican Party is usually identified as the conservative social elite that are more wealthy, that young Republicans are more likely to identify with that and also be more wealthy. And therefore, they already have a lot of the tools and resources they need to run for office, which makes supporting a young Republican much easier for the Republican Party. Whereas the Democratic Party has a little bit less resources in their younger candidates, and therefore are probably less likely to be able to support a young candidate fully. But that was a bit of a tangent. Let's go back to talking about voting. In 2020, this survey was done for how youth actually approve of one party or another. And as you can see, the youth approval rate for the Democratic Party was much higher than the one for the Republican Party. And at first this might seem like a yay Democrats moment, they're winning. But this is actually very dire. This means that there's something wrong in our democracy. For a long time, the Republican Party has not been able to win over the young vote as a majority, like the Democratic Party has done. And as we can see in many of the examples of broken but fixable democracies, the losing party will take a step back from policy for a little bit and figure out why their strategy is not working to win over a demographic. In failing democracies, we see that the losing party does not do this for shenanigans, corruption, gerrymandering, all the things that could mean that they're winning without winning the numbers game, which is what policy really boils down to. And the Republican Party is not doing this. This is very, very dire. The Republican Party remains a very right-centric party, but if they were to target young people, they would have to tailor their message to what a younger audience would want. And these votes could be very important. These votes could win them elections fair and square. By targeting young people, they could bring the center of their party back to a more center area where they could represent a larger portion of the population. And as a quote from a very good book that I read, Tyranny of the Minority states, "A more diverse Republican Party capable of winning fair and square might be bad news for the Democratic Party, but very good news for democracy." So this is something that must be done to secure democracy for future generations, but also just to give young people more of a voice and a choice when it comes to democracy. And although I painted a very grim picture for you all, not all hope is lost. A poll was recently done for the 2024 presidential election about how likely young people are to vote. And this is extremely likely. This, if this were to actually happen, would be the highest voting rate that we have ever seen for young people. And although this seems really, really great, this could be because of the salience of the election. People are really fired up. They hate one candidate, they hate the other candidate, so they're more likely to vote. But we need to get to the point where young people are voting in every single election. The boring elections, God forbid, the midterm elections. We need young people to vote every single time so that they can always have a voice in our democracy and so that their issues are being addressed by politicians. And for this to be done, there's a couple things that need to be changed. First of all, there are institutional changes when it comes to running for office. It's far too expensive with little monetary payout. Young people pay a ton of money and fees, and campaigning can't really be helped because that would take an odd economic shift. But we can lower the fees that it costs to run and increase the salary so that young people can actually run for office in an affordable way where you don't lose everything. Next is young people need community support, and this is something every single person in this room is responsible for at this point. If somebody you know wants to run for office or they don't think they want to vote in the next election, you need to be there for them. You need to offer them time and support so that they can run for office, even financially or just volunteering. Or you need to help them get information so that they can be an educated voter, and hopefully that will help them vote. And the next thing falls upon the responsibility of the parties themselves. They need to start targeting young people. And though this is very pertinent for the Republican Party, the Democratic Party needs to do this as well. This could be as simple as holding young youth-centric political rallies, or starting organizations where young people can be taught and empowered to become the next young leaders of tomorrow, which is something that Obama has done. And it could even be something as simple as a meet and greet, where young people can sit down with local politicians and discuss what is being covered and the issues that young people think need to be covered that aren't being seen by politicians. Overall, this needs to happen so that young people can have a voice in future generations, and so every generation can have a voice. And overall, it needs to happen so that democracy can stand strong for future generations. Thank you.